request. The 8 projects include Herschel, Kepler, the NPOS Preparatory Project, Glory, Orbiting Carbon Observatory Aquarius, Gamma Ray Large Area Space Telescope, and the Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy. Given that the 09 budget request includes several new initiatives estimated to cost $500 million or more, what specific steps is NASA taking to address the problems with the 8 missions cited in the budget book and to ensure that any new initiatives do not exceed congressional thresholds? What, if any, margin is there in your budget request to handle any additional schedule and cost growth? I have an additional concern that I'd like to raise on this topic, and that centers on NASA's lack of responsiveness to Congress in complying with a statute that established the cost and schedule thresholds. Specifically, PL 109-155, the NASA Authorization Act, is clear in stating how quickly notification of such threshold breaches is to be conveyed to the Congress. In particular, the person overseeing the program experiencing such increases or delays must notify the administrator immediately and formalize such notification in writing no later than 30 days after the initial notification. In turn, not later than 15 days after receiving this written notification, the administration must transmit the notification received to NASA's authorization committees. Congressional committees receive copies of the program notifications for projects such as Glory some 4 months late. Considering the explicit timelines in the legislation, what caused such a lengthy delay? Furthermore, the Act requires that not later than 30 days after receiving the program's written notification, the administrator must determine if the program is likely to exceed development costs by 15% or more, or whether a milestone is likely to be delayed by 6 months or more. If the determination is affirmative, not later than 15 days after making the determination, the administrator must transmit to NASA's authorization committees a report including a description of the increase in cost or delay in schedule and action taken or proposed to be taken. We still have not received your report. The Assistant Administrator for Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs notified the congressional committees that the mandated report would be submitted no later than March 2008. Even that would make it almost 6 months late. What is the reason for this significant delay? I'm concerned that NASA is not taking these reporting requirements seriously, and I will be pursuing this issue further in the coming months. Thank you for listening to such a long question, and now the floor is yours to answer the question.
Yes, sir. Chairman Udall, let me begin with your last point, and I'll apologize for the agency and offer to take that response for the record because I think it requires a detailed and careful response. And I understand your frustration, and sir, I can make a commitment to you that we will work to do this better going forward. I'd like to spend my time, if I may, speaking to your first 2 questions.
Please do, Dr. Stern. Thank you for that assurance.
Yes, sir. You asked about what management tools we're putting in place and what kinds of cost reserve postures we're taking, and that's what I want to respond to. Regarding management tools, there's a whole variety of things that over the last year we have put in place. I know you may have heard about some of these. I'm going to lay them out, and when you see them as a larger picture, I think you'll appreciate that we're really in a pretty strong posture now to go forward. We are oftentimes now lying in a bed made for us, that is, projects that were selected that had too much content for the available budget or too little reserves for them. SMD has now adopted a philosophy that doesn't try to stuff 6 or 8 pounds in that 5-pound bag. The missions that we're selecting, and I can tell you that all 3 that we selected last year, Beryl, New Star, and Grail, all came in well below their cost caps, and that they were verified by independent cost estimates made by non-advocate parties. And we looked at those very carefully and factored those into our selection criteria. So we're trying to make sure that missions have a lot of headroom. The administrator has required, from a reservist posture, that all missions above a threshold are required to have a statistical cost confidence level of 70%, which often requires reserves in excess of 30%, which are quite large by historical standards, something that NASA had not done in the past, for which Administrator Griffin should receive credit for insisting upon adequate reserves. We ourselves in SMD have taken D-scope seriously. I think you've seen examples of that on the MSL mission. You've seen some D-scopes in some Earth science missions. They're not always hardware or instruments. Sometimes they're done in the operations phase. They're done in terms of the testing or the degree of scientific analysis. We're actually trying to put feedback loops in place. In the same vein, we have, on at least one occasion, told the science principal investigator that if he can't control his costs, we're going to find another principal investigator for the mission. And as you're aware, we've also come forward with new missions that have cost caps, which is quite unorthodox. We're turning that from a rare to a routine practice. I think that those and other tools that we're putting in place, like PI minimum experience requirements, are giving us the suite of dials on the control panel, if you will, to ensure that we can manage the projects that we're starting to stay in budget so that overruns become rare instead of routine.
Thank you for that thoughtful and comprehensive answer. And the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Feeney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking of reports, I asked Mike Griffin, other than more money, which we all agree we would like to see for NASA, what two things he'd like to have. And first thing he said, well, I've got 53 reports annually due to Congress. I'd like to have a few fewer reports. But he also mentioned ITAR as a very important priority legislatively this year. Some things in the program can go on with or without congressional action this year. Does anybody have some comments on the importance of passing ITAR? Obviously, we have implications for the human spaceflight program, but are specifically with respect to the science programs, are there implications and importances in visiting ITAR as we deal with this that you could give us advice on as we try to take this up? Dr. Burns.
Yes, Congressman Feeney, happy to address that. We've wrestled with that a good deal at the University of Colorado in building missions, and particularly involving international graduate students and restrictions associated with them being involved, as well as we have a number of collaborations with England, Australia, Canada, and those restrictions to very friendly countries, countries where we have a number of graduate students and collaborators, have been very restrictive. Looking more broadly, though, I think the issue is one in which, as Dr. Stern said a little bit ago, we need to be looking at more international collaborations, because sharing the costs and the risks associated with these large projects in astrophysics, for example, the LISA mission, or the Constellation X mission, we need those international collaborations. The ITAR restrictions are making it more difficult than they need to be, and I think are really raising the risk factor for some of our missions.
Dr. Squires, did you have something?
Yeah, I would just say that ITAR is some very well-intentioned legislation that has had some unintended consequences for space science in the United States that has actually worked against the best interests of the nation. As the principal investigator for the Mars Exploration Rover project, I've had the opportunity at Cornell University to have many very talented students come and want to work on the mission. These are students and postdocs from nations like Denmark and Canada. And we've had to turn away people because of the restrictions on ITAR. And these are people who could materially advance a United States space mission and make it a better mission. And if there's anything that this committee or that this Congress could do to reduce the burden in a way that in no way endangers national interest, and obviously that has to be foremost. But in a mission like operating rovers on Mars, I feel that we could involve international partners in a fashion that would put no national interest at risk and would benefit this nation.
Thank you. By the way, thanks to Chairman Gordon's permission, I expect to attend in Beijing the first Global Space Summit, the 3rd or 4th week of April. It's awfully presumptuous, but not surprising given the way the Chinese have advanced in their space programs, for them to be hosting the first ever Global Space Summit. But if we're not going to deal with international partners, clearly the Chinese are going to use it to every advantage, as well as some others. Dr. Stern, lately we've been hearing that NASA and the science community have used the word balance to describe managing goals, obviously with the budget constraints that we've all voiced problems with. Also, the allocation of resources across the agency, across specific science mission directorate, and across individual